Hello, folks. Welcome to Pradeep and Paramjeet show. Another episode of it. So, Pradeep, how are you, man?
I'm doing well. It's funny how when you mention the title, you always do the opposite. You always put my name first and then your name, and then I always do the opposite.
Yeah, it sounds better that way. Uh, I know you need to get out of here for some very important domestic stuff. So let's jump right into it. In the previous episode, we thought about talking about something that has happened in India, especially a kind of a killing of a very popular folk magician or singer, whichever way you want to put it. So, and we wanted to think about this whole idea, tragic as it is, and unbelievably difficult it must be for everyone who is related to that, in the context of the warriors to gangsters, how we came to be, and what are your takes on it, or what sort of commentary you have on this incident, which is
Well,
not the only one that has happened. It has happened many, but this is very relevant because this guy came to Canada on a student visa, made a big hit here, went back to live in a village in Punjab, which is actually the most relevant part of the story.
hmm that's really interesting. I think there's so many more questions than answers for me on this one, Parmjit. I think the big thing that I've seen, and I have a unique, you can say, take on this because I also grew up in Vancouver. So I spent 10 years in Vancouver in a period of time where the Punjabi, you can say, youth, that's when the gangsterism really started with individuals. I don't want to name their names to give them glory, but they started shooting each other. These Indian Punjabi gangs started shooting each other, killing each other off. And that really led to, I believe, something that has trickled into the Indian culture in India. So I think rather than that gangster coming from that gangster theme or feeling coming from Punjab and India, I think it actually went from here to Punjab. And I think more people there are adopting it now because they've seen what's happened here in Canada, where literally in the lower mainland, I remember a period of time when there was shootings every week. Every week there was someone either attempted murder or a murder of someone in the Punjabi culture. And so I don't know what's happened. I think this the one thing is certain for me is that inside, whether it's part of our heritage, our culture, our folklore, our stories, um, being a warrior and standing up for ourselves is in our blood, in the Punjabi blood. And not taking BS from other people is in our blood as well. But I think that has been in some ways bastardized. I think people have abused it, and now we've turned into this. I think people have taken that warrior spirit and turned it into gangsterism, which is very, very unhealthy because it's impacting our youth. And every time it impacts our youth, like it's just going to get passed on from one generation to the next generation unless we do something about it.
Exactly. Means I think if you allow me to add one more word into what you have said, means the whole idea of warriorship or warriorhood has been misrepresented, hijacked, and bastardized. You have already used this word bastardized. And I want to pick up on the idea that how it is going to impact the youngsters. Because if you notice, this uh, singer's fan following is literally youngsters.
hmm
So today, in the purpose of our conversation, I, as you have said earlier, I more like a questions to all the singers out there and our community members at large. And it pains me really when individuals, whether from our intellectuals or non-intellectuals or pseudo-intellectuals, tend to co-opt this idea of warriorship and tend to fit into every single thing that can happen within Punjabi context. So my first comment or question to our community and all the folks who actually sing glorify gun culture is that how does it help our community, one, and our culture second. And I piggyback this comment from a kind of a narrative that has I have seen a little bit from social media, that this guy put Punjabi music in the international realm.
Mm.
And that could be true, because we will only get to know it in 10 years or 20 years, because we need to know the survivability index of something, not a kind of a temporary flip in international consciousness. But more so, I what really has been swimming in my mind is that would Punjabi people want to be identified as gangsters in that context? That if this guy has catapulted this Punjabi music into international scene, does it do good to the community? Do we want all of us, whether we wear turbans or not, to be identified with that kind of sentiment that Punjabi culture is to some extent has that gangsterism in it, because that's how it became popular.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Parmjit. I think that it's changed for the next generation. I think it's different. I think if I take a look back, like if we take a look at Sikhism, if I take a look at someone that taught me about Sikhism, my grandfather, and I've talked about him in the past, like he was a true warrior. He fought in the army to protect India, and he knew more about Sikhism, Sikhi, than anybody else I knew. And when I take a look at him, he had principles, he had morals, he had a lot of strength, but there was principles and morals that led that strength, and that's something that we've missed out on. I think that that is what is missing now in today's culture. And I don't think, and I have my perception, my perspectives of, I think we are not mentoring our next generation. We're not teaching them about what Sikhi really means. And that gap, yeah, we can say we were warriors, we helped it, the independence of India and all this kind of stuff, right? In 1984 and all of that is honestly just irrelevant to where we are today. Because I here's something that my grandfather taught me. He he would never get involved in arguments with individuals. Like he just wouldn't, because he knew that unless the person was actually educated on the topic, there's no point in actually having a conversation about that, because it would go up against deaf ears. Um, and it was really interesting to see his approach. You could tell that he felt strongly about certain things and he stood up for them, but he knew that the only way to impact someone was to educate them.
Yeah, exactly. And pushing the point forward means that the question I again want to raise for all the individuals who are interested in this topic is that, mm, would Guru Nanak Dev Ji do that or allow for it?
Mm,
Um, all the things that are happening in our culture, would Guru Gobind Singh Ji be okay with the current definition of gun culture and our
mm,
spin on warriorship? And if the question is no, then I think we all have to, uh, take a moment to pause and reflect that we are literally taking the whole idea of warriorship out of its context and profiteering from it. I would not hesitate from using the word profiteer, because regardless of howsoever brave that person is, that also has profiteered from that kind of a gangsterism
mm,
or songs or lyrics or whatever that is. That's one thing. The second thing is what message it tells or give to the youth, what kind of a role modeling it does. And going back to your point means I don't think we are doing a great job at mentoring our youngsters, because youngsters are one who are naive, but their body is swimming in all the chemicals which makes perfect recipe for being killed, killing, revolutions. Means that's why revolutions
mm,
often happen by youngsters. That's why Bhagat Singh died at such a young age, because it is where ideology, if it is not properly put together, meet with biology, makes a dangerous mix.
mm,
And that actually brings the most important relevant question is that, as a community, should we reflect upon this idea of warriorship and put it together in a proper way so that our youth can begin to think of in a healthy way rather than unhealthy way.
Hmm. Really good. I can totally see what you're talking about there when it comes to biology, because yeah, when you're a raving young man in your early 20s or mid 20s, for example, and you got all of those hormones, yeah, you're going after power, you're going after status, you're going after girls, right? That all of that stuff is very appealing to people, and that's the group that is most famous for these types of behavior. So I think that's a really good part, and I think maybe we should touch on that in another episode, because I think that in itself is something very important when we take a look at when do we focus most of our attention in terms of mentoring our children, right? A lot of times we do it when they're younger and they're maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, but they require just as much attention when they're in their early 20s, right? So just because your son or daughter goes to school and they're in university doesn't mean that they're completely independent. There's still some growth and maturity that needs to happen. And it's important for parents to be there.
It's actually absolutely means from strictly scientific perspective, we know that our brain in complete sense of term does not go completely online until you are 25.
Hmm.
So that's why kids who are that age who oftenly follow these kind of singers, um, they are very vulnerable. Mean, they seems to be at the verge where they can make their own decision just because they can drive cars and do all kind of post social media posts doesn't mean that they are actually not vulnerable. In fact, that part of the population is the most vulnerable during that part of the, and if they are not mentored well during that time, or if they are mentored badly during that time, then you are setting a stage for them which is really unwholesome in the long scheme of things. And I think that's where my major concern is. Now there's always competing arguments about it, we can debate about it, but I don't think we need to win any argument in this space. We need to in fact put this question and reflect upon, all of us, whether we are on this side of the mic or on the other side of the mic, that what kind of responsibility we all have. What is going to happen to all those millions of kids who follow certain kind of music and certain kind of advice? What kind of people they're going to turn up in 20, 30 years? And what kind of society they are going to generate of all the things they have been doing?
Yeah, and here's the interesting part, Barmji. Uh, this if they're going to commit violence, for example, what we've noticed here in Canada, especially in British Columbia, is the violence is mainly against our fellow Punjabi folk. Like it's not focused elsewhere, it's towards each other. So what's with that? So there's one thing to be violent, it's one thing to have gun violence, it's one thing to hurt and kill people, but when you're doing it of within this your own community, that's something that tells you something else. Like, what is it within our community, in our Punjabi community, that we are more likely to kill each other than someone outside of our community?
Yeah, similar things have happened even in 70s and 80s Punjab. If you see the number of people got killed during those few decades, more were actually Sikhs than any other community. Means any person who has died during the time is tragic enough, but it is actually interesting to note that people killed each other, and that's the tragedy of all this. So if the idea of these kind of singing styles and lyrics is about uh, your own rights and all sort of things, anti-establishment sentiment, y- you are missing the point by quite a million miles, I think, because you're killing each other. What kind of right is going to give you that, and what kind of society you're going to create in the long scheme of things? And this is going back to our main point, is that how we have actually taken the spirit of warriorship that were and is present in Sikhs and Punjabi community, has taken a very sinister ring to it. I mean, let me share with you that actually, whenever I think of warriors, I often also think about samurais, Japanese samurais. They have a same thing, that they are expert meditators, spiritually oriented people, but they are fierce warriors. And similarly, if you see the philosophy, I think that's pretty much what the Sikh philosophy of warriorship is all about. But there's an interesting part to that culture, that as much as there's summarized, there's also another variety of similarly talented expert killers in Japanese culture, and those called Ronin.
Mm,
And these are people who have gone awry. These are the people who have a similar kind of training like samurais, but they are actually like hitman for hire. These are mercenaries. And often think of this gangsterism as like that spin on the things. They have the spirit, but they are actually using for a very different kind of purposes. Some people profiteer from it, some people profiteer other people by using their skill set. And that's a very worrisome.
oh, it's very worrisome, and I think a lot of it is power and profit because just from my limited knowledge, yeah, some a lot of these killings do happen as a result of people disrespecting each other. But I think there's an underlying layer of either drugs or some other kind of profit entity that they're fighting over, right? Someone's come into my territory and taking my customers or clients, whatever. It is some kind of drug warfare or gangster warfare is based on some kind of illegal activity that is happening that is profiting someone. So I do think that's there. I think the big question though, Parmjeet, and I know I've seen people talk about this, like this is a conversation that people are having. Like, what do we do with our youth? Especially for the people that have been here for a while and saying, you know what, our culture is getting a bad name in Canada. And the West Coast, it already has a bad name. You, for example, when we used to go to nightclubs as young adults, and then all this kind of stuff happened, we weren't allowed into nightclubs after that. They wouldn't let brown people in, up and in. And it's like, well, we're different. We're not, we're not here to cause trouble. We're not here to do anything, but we would be profiled. I remember being profiled by police officers just because I had a shaved head and I was brown. That was their mandate, was to go over and find anybody in Vancouver police that they thought look like a gangster and shake them up a little bit so that it stirred them into not doing what they were supposed to be doing that evening, right? That type of activity. So it's not leading to a good result at the end of the day. And again, the big question is, what do we do? And I'm still not clear about that.
I think maybe that could be a topic for our next time. But again, I think we can leave it to our audience, asking them to sit back and reflect upon this idea of warriorship,
Mm,
which and how it has been hijacked by some people who like to profiteer from it. While they profiteer, there's someone who is incurring the cost, and the cost is passed on to ordinary individuals and their sons and daughters. So my question to everyone here is that, are you willing to tolerate that? That you are you willing to live with that cost? Because
mm,
somebody has to pay the cost. When one person dies because of that kind of gangsterism, um, the cost is to the whole society. Now the whole Punjabi culture is known around the world for having killed one of their most famous or well-known singer for the past few years, and that is where it becomes more problematic. So
mm.
would you like to be identified with that kind of a tag?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to leave the audience with. And then we can pick up on another episode and actually talk because I think there's a lot more that both you and I have in terms of thoughts and questions that we can share with the audience here. And I'm sure the audience has questions as well.
Yeah, I think we will leave it here. And if you folks have any questions or commentary on what we have spoken about, or you would like to share some of your experiences or your own conversation within your own homes with your sons and daughters about all this is happening, because it is at the end of the day it is going to impact us, whether we like it or not, we will love to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you again next time. If you have not subscribed to our channel, please do so. We would appreciate your support. So thank you, Pradeep, and have a wonderful time.
Yeah, thanks, Parmjeet. Thank you out there for tuning in. Take care.